What some executives refer to as a motivational style, others describe as something far more troubling. Former staff members who worked closely with Meghan Markle are now speaking about a workplace dynamic they say was not accidental, not emotional, and not spontaneous. According to these accounts, the behavior followed a pattern, one designed to control, destabilize, and extract compliance. Several former insiders describe situations where criticism was delivered publicly, often in front of colleagues or observers. These moments were not portrayed as heat-of-the-moment outbursts. Instead, they were described as deliberate performances. The goal, according to those who experienced it, was not correction but humiliation, followed by emotional recalibration behind closed doors. One former palace-linked staffer summarized it bluntly. The public reprimand would be severe, leaving the target embarrassed and shaken. Later, in private, the tone would shift. Supportive language would appear. Praise would return. The message would be reframed as belief in the person's potential. That contrast, staffers say, was intentional. Psychologists often describe this pattern as emotional destabilization. When praise and punishment alternate unpredictably, people become hyper-focused on pleasing the authority figure. Several former employees say that is exactly what happened. They became anxious, overworked, and constantly uncertain about where they stood. According to these accounts, the environment was emotionally exhausting. Staff members would arrive hopeful and motivated, believing they were part of something meaningful. Over time, many reported anxiety, self-doubt, and fear of public embarrassment. Departures were frequent. Enthusiasm faded quickly. Sources say this pattern did not remain confined to palace life. As Meghan transitioned into different professional settings, similar dynamics reportedly followed. New teams formed, old teams disappeared, advisors rotated out. Public-facing explanations varied, but privately, the turnover raised eyebrows. People close to these environments describe two distinct personas. One was warm, engaging, and affirming. The other was sharply critical, exacting, and unforgiving. Which version appeared seemed unpredictable, keeping those around her constantly off balance. According to multiple accounts, the process often followed a consistent sequence. First came public criticism, then came private reassurance. Then came renewed loyalty from staff determined to regain approval. Over time, that cycle repeated. Former employees describe feeling manipulated, but struggling to articulate why. On the surface, each incident could be explained away. High standards, pressure, passion. But taken together, they formed a pattern that many now recognize only in hindsight. Observers say this behavior extended beyond professional relationships. According to people familiar with the couple's dynamic, emotional displays also played a strategic role in personal interactions, particularly in the presence of Harry. Several insiders claim that emotional vulnerability would surface quickly when Harry was present. Tears, distress, and expressions of hurt reportedly appeared during moments of conflict. Harry, described by those who know him as deeply protective, would immediately intervene. However, those same sources allege that when Harry was not present, the emotional tone shifted dramatically. The vulnerability disappeared. The assertiveness returned. One former staffer described it as watching a switch flip. Experts in interpersonal dynamics explain why this approach can be effective. Emotional displays can redirect accountability, frame criticism as cruelty, and enlist allies instinctively. In relationships, this can create a powerful protective shield. According to insiders, this pattern reinforced Harry's loyalty while limiting access from those who might challenge the narrative. Over time, critics say, that dynamic contributed to isolation. Friends from Harry's earlier life reportedly became less visible. Long-standing relationships faded, family connections strained further. People who expressed concern found themselves pushed to the margins. Former staff members say this narrowing of the circle was not accidental. They describe it as systematic. Anyone who raised doubts or questioned decisions gradually disappeared from the inner orbit. This isolation, sources argue, created a closed feedback loop. Harry increasingly relied on one perspective, one interpretation of events, motives, and threats. Alternative viewpoints diminished. Observers note that similar patterns appeared in professional collaborations. Each new phase brought new teams. Advisors were replaced, publicists changed, institutional memory vanished. Critics argue that this constant resetting served a purpose. Without long-term staff, there were fewer people who could notice inconsistencies or challenge evolving narratives. Each chapter began without witnesses to the previous one. Those familiar with the situation say the strategy was particularly evident in high-profile social relationships. Alliances formed quickly, often with influential figures, but when those relationships carried risk, when someone knew too much or might speak freely, they ended just as abruptly. The underlying theme, according to multiple insiders, was control. Control of perception, control of narrative, control of access. And over time, that control came at a cost. The revolving door of staff, the broken friendships, and the growing number of critical voices began to attract attention. What once appeared as ambition now struck some observers as calculation. What once seemed like confidence began to resemble orchestration. By the time these accounts began circulating publicly, the pattern had already repeated itself too many times to ignore. As these workplace and interpersonal patterns came under increased scrutiny, attention turned to how they manifested within elite social circles. According to sources familiar with Hollywood dynamics, access to influential spaces is tightly controlled. Invitations matter. Appearances are planned. Protocol is understood. That is why a particular high-profile birthday celebration raised eyebrows. Multiple attendees reportedly questioned how certain guests ended up there. Whispers circulated quietly throughout the event. Who invited them? No one seemed to know. Observers noted details that suggested the appearance may not have been planned. The absence of wardrobe changes, the lack of coordination, the visible uncertainty among other guests. In celebrity culture, such details are not trivial. They signal whether someone belongs or whether they arrived by assumption rather than invitation. Following the event, reports emerged of internal damage control. According to sources, a narrative was pushed, suggesting that photo-sharing agreements had been violated. The implication was serious, that hosts had breached legal terms. Industry insiders say this explanation raised immediate doubts. Such agreements are rare in private social settings, especially among seasoned media families. The story did not align with standard practice. Behind the scenes, sources claim discomfort grew within the public relations team. Professionals who rely on credibility with journalists found themselves defending claims that were difficult to substantiate. Not long after, the head of public relations resigned. The tenure was brief. Those familiar with the situation say the decision reflected ethical concerns rather than routine turnover. This incident, critics argue, exemplified a broader problem. When reputation management shifts from spin to accusation, trust erodes quickly. Media relationships fracture. Allies become liabilities. Similar concerns surfaced regarding attendance at solemn events. According to entertainment reporters, efforts were allegedly made to secure invitations to funerals of prominent figures, not due to close personal relationships, sources say, but because of the visibility such events attract. Critics found this troubling. Funerals, they argue, are not networking opportunities. Using grief as a stage violates unspoken social norms, even in celebrity culture. The contrast with other situations was notable. Public expressions of closeness did not always translate into private participation when no publicity value existed. Observers began to question the authenticity of public narratives. Were relationships genuine, or were they strategic? Were emotions spontaneous, or were they timed? That skepticism intensified during legal proceedings involving Prince Harry. While testifying in a case unrelated to his wife, Harry introduced deeply emotional commentary about her suffering. The moment drew attention. It was dramatic, it was unexpected, and according to critics, it felt rehearsed. Analysts noted the shift in tone. Throughout testimony, Harry had been combative and controlled. When speaking about his wife, emotions surged. The contrast was striking. Media commentators questioned the consistency. If life was truly defined by misery, how did that align with the joyful imagery shared publicly? The contradiction was difficult to reconcile. Body language experts weighed in on recent public videos meant to convey happiness and spontaneity. Their assessments were unflattering. They described heavy editing, staged movement, and manufactured authenticity. According to these experts, the performances resembled classic damage control imagery, designed not to document reality, but to counter suspicion. Even early photographs were re-examined. Analysts suggested the connection appeared less immediate and less intimate than later narratives claimed. As scrutiny intensified, audience response shifted. New media projects underperformed. Engagement lagged. Rankings fell dramatically. Industry analysts say numbers tell their own story. Attention cannot be forced. Sympathy cannot be recycled indefinitely. A former royal communications expert summarized the situation succinctly. Credibility has value, and once spent recklessly, it is difficult to recover. The repeated use of emotional appeals, victim narratives, and strategic reinventions may have worked once, but patterns, once visible, lose effectiveness. What remains is a public increasingly skeptical, a media landscape less forgiving, and a brand struggling to regain trust. The question now is not whether reinvention is possible, but whether the audience is still willing to believe it.